Want to, if we could quickly here, talk about the Georgia grand jury. The grand jury in Georgia investigating allegations that former President Trump tried to overturn the 2020 election. We find by a unanimous vote that no widespread fraud took place in the Georgia 2020 presidential election that could result in overturning that election. You appeared before that grand jury in November and were asked about a call that Georgia's Secretary of State said you made to him after the 2020 election. Do you have any regrets about calling the Secretary of State and any concerns about perjury?
No concerns about my testimony. The grand jury analysis that there was no widespread fraud in Georgia, I agree with that.
Yeah, I agree that Lindsey Graham may have some problems on his hands because now he's really trying to seem to weasel his way out of that testimony. Yeah, it seems to be the case. Check this reporting out from Forbes. Senator Lindsey Graham used $350,000 of campaign money to pay Jones Day, the law firm that unsuccessfully tried to get him out of testifying about attempts to overthrow the 2020 election in Fulton County, Georgia. Graham's legal team took his objections all the way to the Supreme Court. Graham also created a legal expense fund that raised $158,000 through February, and his PAC donated $1,000 to the fund. Even more, we got a picture of that pay stub. Ooh, it's always money that is a problem. Those legal fees are expensive. Here's more from Forbes. Using the campaign money saved Graham from having to spend his own money. And that appears to be legal. Politicians are allowed to spend donor funds on expenses that directly relate to allegations arising from their campaign or office activities. But federal law prohibits them from using campaign money to cover personal expenses. Now, Tristan Snell, he's a lawyer in New York. He broke down that this seems like there is definitely something more here. He had said Lindsey Graham misallocated $350,000 of campaign money on apparently personal legal expenses, trying to evade a subpoena to testify before the Fulton County, Georgia grand jury on attempting to overthrow the 2020 election. Graham must be investigated ASAP. Why such misallocation is illegal under federal campaign finance laws. A politician can spend campaign money on legal expenses arising from his campaign or Senate work, but the court specifically held that Graham had to testify because of his conduct outside his official work. Indeed, as much as Graham wanted to try to claim that he was doing business when he was talking to those Georgia officials trying to find some extra votes for Trump, well, it's not the case, and that's why he ended up having to testify. So it's interesting that he wanted to, let's see, basically write off this expense toward his campaign fund so he didn't have to use it from his own personal pocket. Yeah, it sounds like Lindsey Graham may have a few issues with following the rules. Jessica.
Adrienne, I love the sentence you used that Lindsey Graham is acting up. I just picture Lindsey Graham like with sunglasses on, listening to Drake, worst behaviors on. That's what I picture when I hear Lindsey Graham's acting up. It's a good mental image. But really, everyone that was in the camp of the election was stolen, there was election fraud, ballots were cast that were fake, all of this stuff that happened immediately after Donald Trump very clearly lost the election in 2020. This should have been interrogated then. There are so many people who believed all of the wild claims about election fraud in 2020. And the American memory is very short. If we had put Lindsey Graham and the others under oath, do you know for sure that there was fraud in this election? What evidence do you have of that? Force them to either make the choice to perjure themselves and lie, or tell the truth when people are paying attention to it before they get it so ingrained in their brain that yeah, the 2020 election was rigged and stolen from Donald Trump. Because they're going to go on believing this. It's not gonna have the same impact now that Lindsey Graham is saying something to the contrary of what he said in 2020. In fact, the folks that believe there was election fraud are quite conspiratorial and will come up with conspiracies and say, well, they got to Lindsey Graham, the deep state got to Lindsey Graham, and the election was definitely rigged. And so there are consequences to the moment Donald Trump leaving office, them not prosecuting this to the fullest extent, because people already, for good reasons, don't have a lot of faith in our election process. We have terrible gerrymandering, we have modern versions of Jim Crow laws. It's very inaccessible for people to get good political information and participate in elections. That is a problem. The problem is not that our electoral process is rigged to support Republicans and Donald Trump. So I feel like it's a little too late, but it's good to see Lindsey Graham squirming about this, and his use of campaign finances in this case is very damning, and he's not the first to do it.
Yeah, well, let's just hope that the GOP-controlled sectors will actually do something about this, because too often it seems to be the case that members of either party get away with playing with our money.